Hello, my name is Anna Barker, and I have been commenting on great works for the past 5.5 years since April of 2020. We've covered many, many thick tomes from the Epic of Gilgamesh and Paradise Lost to Les Miserables, The Red and the Black, Madame Bovary, and the great Russian canon from Crime and Punishment to Brothers Karamazov, and from War and Peace to Anna Karenina. And I decided to go through all the great novels of Dostoevsky, all the post-Siberia, post Notes from Underground volumes of Dostoevsky. You can see my little black Napoleon statue right there, my little porcelain statue. It's from the Hungarian company Zsolnai. My mom gave it to me for my birthday. She lives in Budapest, so I got a Hungarian porcelain piece that looks like Napoleon for my birthday. My mom knows me well. And then the tomes right next to him are some of the tomes that I'm covering between 2024 and 2027. So Notes from Underground is the foundation for the Great Five. Last fall, we read Notes from Underground, and we read Crime and Punishment, and the spectacular, spectacular copy of the great Jacques-Louis David painting Napoleon Crossing the Alps is in my background, and it has been there since last fall because Napoleon is such a huge part of Raskolnikov's musings about the fate of great men of history and to what extent they inform his thinking. And I decided to keep Napoleon there for our discussion of The Idiot, which we are doing right now in the fall of 25. Because guess what? There's going to be a long passage later on in the novel dedicated to Napoleon Bonaparte. He can't fathom Russian literature without the influence of Napoleon Bonaparte. So 2024, we read Notes from Underground and Crime and Punishment. In the fall of 25, we are reading The Idiot. In the fall of 26, we're going to read the third novel, Demons. And then in the spring of 27, we will read the novel that is not as well loved and commented on as the other great Dostoevsky novels, The Adolescent. So spring 2027 and fall 2027, we'll go through Brothers Karamazov one more time, because once you read the entirety of Dostoevsky, that final page of Brothers Karamazov makes so much more sense. And it becomes sort of the apotheosis of everything Dostoevsky created in his works. So 5 novels, Crime and Punishment, Idiot, Demons, Adolescent, Brothers Karamazov. And this Zoom will focus on the introductory thoughts on Dostoevsky. I'm going to go through his biography and explain to what extent certain aspects of his biography contribute to the development of The Idiot, and how The Idiot reflects so many biographical aspects of Dostoevsky. So without much further ado, I'm going to connect to my PowerPoint and go through the stages of Dostoevsky's development all the way till we get to The Idiot. Then perhaps I'm going to pause PowerPoint and take a few questions. And then I'm going to reconnect my PowerPoint and show you a few images that reflect the literary aspects of The Idiot, or literary connections that we encounter in The Idiot. So, right. Well, Dostoevsky, so his dates of life are 1821 to 1881. We celebrated his bicentennial few years ago. And to understand the significance of Dostoevsky in Russian culture and global literature, we need to focus on some aspects of his biography that are intimately reflected in The Idiot. So his dates, and those of you who know me well know that I put together an exhibition at the University of Iowa where I teach on Dostoevsky's 200th anniversary. And just to give you the heads up, I'm doing the same thing for Tolstoy during his bicentennial year. So August through December of 2028, the exhibition dedicated to Tolstoy's bicentennial, with lots of War and Peace and lots of Napoleon, will be at the University of Iowa Main Library Gallery. Dostoevsky is born when Alexander I, the one who defeated Napoleon, is the Tsar. And of course, the Napoleonic campaign is reflected, the 1812 Russian campaign is reflected in War and Peace of Tolstoy so much more than in any works of Dostoevsky, but Napoleon features prominently both in Crime and Punishment in The Idiot. And we are on my Substack page where I comment on Dostoevsky, Honest Thinking Cap, we are just getting close to the end of part 2 of the novel. Later in the novel, we'll have lots more Napoleon. And Dostoevsky's father is connected to Napoleonic history. He was a medical student during the campaign of 1812, and he was commandeered to serve as a military medic. So if Turgenev and Tolstoy had fathers who served in the military in 1812, Dostoevsky's father is also connected to the 1812 campaign. And then, of course, um, Alexander I dies in 1825, and Nicholas I, the next Tsar, comes to the Russian throne during the Decembrist uprising of 1825. And that Decembrist uprising and the exile of the ringleaders of the Decembrist uprising to Siberia will connect intimately to the life of Dostoevsky when he will be exiled to Siberia as well. And this is the Tsar who actually sends Dostoevsky to Siberia in 1849. The Decembrist uprising, it's coming up. The 200th anniversary is coming up in December this year, and I'm going to write about it in one of my columns next year. I'm going to talk about many revolutions, and 1825 is considered to be the first Russian Revolution, even before the revolutions of 1905 and the two 1917 revolutions. Nicholas I is the Tsar during the Crimean War of the 1850s. Tolstoy serves in the Crimean War as an officer. Dostoevsky is in Siberia, so he completely misses this event in Russian history, but he has characters who are constantly referenced. So do you remember in that strange, haunting chapter where all the characters in The Idiot decide to tell the truth, and Totsky tells a complete lie about how important it was for him to get camellias for a woman. The man who was in love with this woman is so distraught that he goes to war, and he dies during the Crimean War. So the Crimean War is constantly reverberating in Dostoevsky novels, but doesn't serve as a key event, such as the Sevastopol sketches of Tolstoy, who served here. There will be a character at the very end of the novel Demons, whose husband also dies during the Crimean War. So in the background, there's always history. And then Alexander II is the one who allows Dostoevsky to come back to St. Petersburg. His sentence is commuted, and Dostoevsky will remain under police surveillance till pretty much the last 5 years of his life, till the mid 1870s. So a political prisoner under police surveillance, writing the most politically and psychologically charged novels in Russian history. The liberation of serfs during the reign of Alexander II is a huge part of the writing of both Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. And those of you who read Anna Karenina with me know that the liberation of serfs is discussed, and land reforms are discussed extensively in Anna Karenina. With Dostoevsky, you hear reverberations of that in all of the novels, and including The Idiot. The assassination of Alexander II happens just after Dostoevsky's death, but you can see to what extent political radicalism is present in all of Dostoevsky novels. So those of you who read Crime and Punishment with me, there's talk of socialist student groups and socialist students who decide that politically motivated murder is excusable if it has noble goals. And in my Substack commentary on The Idiot, we are just coming up on a chapter where these socialist youths come to demand their just retribution from the main character of the novel, Prince Myshkin. And they are going to say things like, "We don't ask, we demand." And Madame Yupanchina, who is such an opinionated character in The Idiot, will of course have a lot to say about these revolutionary youth. The most political, the most ideological novel of Dostoevsky is Demons. And in The Idiot, we already sort of see the reverberations and the preparation of Dostoevsky to discuss extremely political, radical events in Demons. Alexander III is the Tsar who comes to the throne after Alexander II, and the influence on Dostoevsky of Pushkin is tremendous. So we went through the sort of the political history, Dostoevsky's life from Alexander I to Alexander II, and then Alexander III becomes the Tsar after Dostoevsky dies. Pushkin is everywhere, right? And so those of you who are reading along on Substack, Aglaya recites a poem about a night, about a sorrowful night, in the chapter that we are reading today, actually. And it's a poem by Pushkin. And it's fascinating that the Yupanchin family doesn't have the collected works of Pushkin. But Lebedev, who is such a clownish character, who is such a buffoonish character, he asks his daughter Vera to bring the collected works of Pushkin for everyone to enjoy. And Madame Yupanchin, of course, does not want to be in any way beholden to Lebedev, and he says, to sell, of course to sell. I'm selling these for you. You don't have to take them as a gift, because a gift would oblige Madame Yupanchina to Lebedev, and she doesn't want to do that. So Pushkin dies when Dostoevsky is 16, and Dostoevsky will incorporate the works of Pushkin in all of his compositions. So his first novel, Poor Folk, has lots of references to Pushkin. The novel Demons, which we're reading next year, has an epigraph from Pushkin, and Pushkin will be everywhere in Brothers Karamazov as well. So Pushkin is huge influence on Dostoevsky. So is Lermontov. Lermontov is a young man who dies while dueling at 26, and his novel, The Hero of Our Time, which we read and I commented on it on Substack last spring, about a year and a half ago, will inform the depiction of military life in Russian literature, starting with the publication of his The Hero of Our Time. So Lermontov is hugely important, but then so is Turgenev. And Turgenev, Dostoevsky will be in dialogue with Turgenev throughout his literary career. It's fascinating that Turgenev and Tolstoy were frenemies, as you would call them today. And you can see Tolstoy in the military uniform standing. Tolstoy just came back from serving in Sevastopol during the Crimean War. Turgenev is seated right under Tolstoy. And Turgenev was 10 years older than Tolstoy. He was born in 1818, Dostoevsky 1821, Tolstoy 1828. This is Tolstoy after his glorious publication of Sevastopol sketches, which made him famous pretty much overnight. And it's fascinating that Tolstoy and Dostoevsky never met. Their life evolved parallel to each other. They revolved in the same literary circles. They had mutual friends. They were published in the same magazine, and this is the cover of the magazine Ruski Vestnik, Russian Messenger, edited by Katkov. Katkov was a genius editor. He knew how to find his authors, and so in serialized form, in his Russian Messenger, he published all of War and Peace, all of Anna Karenina, and Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Demons, and Brothers Karamazov. So can you imagine being the subscribers to the Russian Messenger in 1866? In the same issue, you would be getting the installments of the next chapters of War and Peace and Crime and Punishment. So The Idiot was also published in the Russian Messenger. A meeting was arranged for Tolstoy and Dostoevsky to meet. Neither of them showed up, so they never met. It's incredible. But when when Tolstoy died in 1910, a copy of Brothers Karamazov was on his nightstand. The great explosion of Russian culture happened during the mid-19th century, and this is the age of the Russian novel, the age of Turgenev, the age of Dostoevsky, the age of Tolstoy, but also the age of spectacular Russian art, such as the artist Surikov, Repin, Kramskoy, And of course, we have to talk about this painting. This is Vasnetsov's The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. We have a character in this novel who keeps saying that he is the interpreter of the apocalypse. And he has discussions of the apocalypse with the most enigmatic character of the novel, Nastasia Filipovna Barashova. Um, we will have to, this painting will be one of the illustrations for an upcoming Substack post on The Idiot. And Vasnetsov's The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse is so famous that if you just look up Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse painting, this is the first image that will come up. So more discussions of the apocalypse as we read The Idiot. Ayvazovsky was also a contemporary of Dostoevsky. He's the Russian Turner. And then, of course, all of the composers. And we have so many references to music in The Idiot because Dostoevsky is living during the time of just spectacular artistic creativity in both literary world and artistic world, but also in the world of music. So this is Mikhail Glinka, really the founder of the Russian style of music. Repin, it was painted by Repin, but Mussorgsky, who created the spectacular opera Boris Godunov based on the Pushkin drama. Borodin, a chemistry professor who wrote an incredible opera called Prince Igor, and of course Tchaikovsky. And Tchaikovsky is inimitable, the perfect Russian genius, and in every possible way wrote in every genre: opera, ballet, symphonic music, songs, chamber music. He is unsurpassable. Also a contemporary of Dostoevsky. At the time when Dostoevsky is writing Crime and Punishment, Russia occupies 3 continents. So Russian Alaska is still Russian at the time. And the geographic shift from Russian Alaska to American Alaska will not occur till after the American Civil War. Dostoevsky was born in Moscow. We consider him to be such a St. Petersburg writer because the Crime and Punishment is the quintessential St. Petersburg novel. So is Notes from Underground, which really is the foundation of Crime and Punishment. The Idiot is a St. Petersburg novel as well, but remotely, because Dostoevsky writes The Idiot in Switzerland and in Italy during his self-imposed exile from Russia. And we really sense that the way he describes St. Petersburg in The Idiot is different from the way he describes St. Petersburg in Crime and Punishment. And I'm going to address this during my second Zoom on The Idiot, which we'll schedule for December. So born in Moscow into a family of a doctor. It's very unusual to be born in a hospital in the early 19th century. Most people are born at home still, but Dostoevsky is the sort of the harbinger of modernity. He was born in a hospital in Moscow because his father was one of the surgeons at this hospital, and there is a statue to Dostoevsky in front of the hospital today. So father, doctor. Mother is a lovely woman who introduces folklore and literature to young Tolstoy. A family of many tumbling children who grew up on the grounds of this hospital for the poor in Moscow. And Dostoevsky's introduction to the misery of life definitely begins early on in his childhood. But he's forever associated with St. Petersburg. So his first book, Poor Folk, is set in St. Petersburg. His subsequent works, such as White Nights and The Double, also set in St. Petersburg, and Notes from Underground, Crime and Punishment, and The Idiot, a great 3 that are also St. Petersburg books. Pushkin will influence all of Dostoevsky's writing, and so does Nikolai Gogol. So I was just teaching Gogol's short stories, The Overcoat and the Nose, in my University of Iowa Introduction to Russian Culture. And I told my students that Dostoevsky said about Gogol's overcoat, we all came out from under Gogol's overcoat. In Russian, it's «Мы все вышли из-под гоголевской шинельки». And the nose, you can feel it everywhere in Dostoevsky. The nose of Gogol evolves into the double of Dostoevsky, and he talks about the doubling of our personality in every one of his great 5. So you are beginning to sense as you read The Idiot that characters double each other, they mirror each other, and no greater mirroring than in the 2 most significant characters of Dostoevsky, Prince Myshkin and Parfen Rogozhin. and they are so attracted to each other because they are the complete opposites of each other, and this doubling is so significant. As we continue reading the novel, we will start feeling the doubling between Nastasia and Aglaya, and that doubling will become very, very important. And there's also doubling between Ippolit, the young man who is suffering from tuberculosis, and Prince Mushkin. So watch for more clashes between these characters as we continue reading the novel. Dostoevsky moves to St. Petersburg when he's 16. He begins attending the military engineering department of the St. Petersburg University, which is housed in the Mikhailovsky Castle. And the history of this castle is fascinating. Emperor Paul was murdered in this castle. He's the father of Alexander I. And I always jokingly tell my students that that's a great way to acquire university buildings. Just wait for a significant historical character to be murdered there. The Romanovs did not want to hold on to this building. It's cursed. But can you imagine being a student, knowing the history of this building and studying at the Mikhailovsky Castle? This is what it looked like at the time of Dostoevsky being a military engineering student here. But of course, the summer gardens are right next door. And this haunting nature of St. Petersburg is so omnipresent in the summer gardens. Pushkin has passages dedicated to the summer gardens in Eugene Onegin. Dostoevsky's characters roam through the summer gardens in St. Petersburg. It is a source of great poetic inspiration for Russian writers. And of course, the whole concept of white nights is so important in so many of Dostoevsky's compositions. That's why before we started reading The Idiot on Substack, I asked everyone to dedicate 1 week to reading Dostoevsky's White Nights. And White Nights is, I always tell my students, if you want a summary of White Nights, it's this. It's just such a delight and such a tragic delight. It is such a beautiful novella, but it's set during this time in St. Petersburg in June where the sun really does not set. It's always I always describe it to my students as 6 hours of twilight and then 10 minutes of darkness and then 4 hours of dawn. And that's White Nights. So you can tell that as we get further into part 2 of The Idiot, we're experiencing White Nights, because even as part 2 begins, Dostoevsky tells us that we're experiencing this incredible moment in the calendar of St. Petersburg, where the days are perfect and endless. There will be a character who will read his confession in the middle of the night, and that confession will happen as we're experiencing the end of twilight and the beginning of dawn. So watch out for all references to lightness and darkness as this character reads his confession later on in the novel. White Nights is a delight. Thank you for reading along. I loved all of your commentary on White Nights. It's a heart-wrenching novella about a character who learns how to love. And I'm about to start making connections between White Nights and The Idiot in my commentary, because what the main character, the dreamer, we never know his name, the dreamer learns from the White Nights experience is that loving is not what you take for yourself. Loving is what you give away. And he understands that the happiness of his love interest is the most important thing for him as a character. And that's very, very hard for us to learn. And you will notice very soon that characters in The Idiot will want to give away their love interests for the benefit of the love interests. And it's the haunting nature of this wanting to give away your love in order to make your love object happy is a crucial element of the continuation of The Idiot. And it's fascinating, the main character of The Idiot. So we know that the dreamer is a dreamer, and the dreamer eventually evolves into the underground man in Notes from Underground. We have so much of the dreamer in Raskolnikov. He is a lone dreamer. And we have so much of the dreamer then in Ippolit Terentiev, the young man who is dying of tuberculosis in The Idiot, and also in Prince Myshkin. But the only named character in White Nights is Nastinka, and Nastinka is the nickname for Anastasia. So Nastasia Filipovna in The Idiot has the same name as Nastinka in White Nights. Another illustration for White Nights. There's a wonderful film by Visconti called White Nights with Marcello Mastroianni, Maria Schell, and Jean Marais. So if you want to watch a French or Italian version of the White Nights, it's delightful, and it's set in Italy after World War II. Poor Folk is Dostoevsky's novel that is a total homage to Pushkin. There's a character who purchases the collected works of Pushkin for another character, and Pushkin surfaces everywhere in White Nights. In Poor Folk or Poor People. In Russian, the title is Бедные люди. The title is an homage to the greatest 19th century Russian historian. His name is Karamzin. So if you read anything historic about the Russian state, you will notice that the authors of 19th century books that are dedicated to the history of Russia would have read Karamzin's The History of the Russian State. So Pushkin's Boris Godunov is an homage to Karamzin, but Karamzin was not only a historian, he was also a fiction writer, and his novella Poor Lisa was an inspiration for Dostoevsky's title. So Poor Lisa in Dostoevsky becomes poor folk or poor people. In Russian, it's Бедная Лиза, and Dostoevsky's first published work is Бедные люди. The Double. The Double befuddles Dostoevsky's critics because they feel that with Poor Folk, he starts that talks about the misery of living in the big city. But Dostoevsky, oh, my internet. I hope it will be okay. Yes. So, but Dostoevsky really befuddles everyone was The Double. And you will see how The Double becomes the most important foundation for all of his later works. So next fall, before we read Dostoevsky's Demons, we are going to read The Double as the foundational book for the connection between the characters that is so eerie and so consequential in all of Dostoevsky's novels. If you want to watch a fabulous adaptation of The Double, this is Dostoevsky meets Orwell. And it's The Double / 1984. And I always tell my students to read watch this film. Jesse Eisenberg is absolutely magnificent in this. And at that point, Dostoevsky's writing career stalls, and he joins this radical political group called the Petrashevsky Circle. It's fascinating. One of my students just sent me a message last night he was my student maybe 10 years ago, and he sent a picture of himself with his buddies in a bar, and he said, "Look at this, Anna, I'm forming my very own Petrashevsky Circle." So these kids really internalize all of this and live the life of Russian literature in their everyday reality. So the Petrashevsky Circle read books, and they read books the wrong year. They read banned books the wrong year. 1848 is when they start meeting, and you can see the Isaac Cathedral in the background. And here's, I constantly show this image because it's such a beautiful painting, was the statue of Peter the Great, named the Bronze Horseman, because of a Pushkin poem, and the Isaac Cathedral in the background. So Dostoevsky lives right here next to the Isaac Cathedral in this building, and there's a plaque on it saying that Dostoevsky lived here between 1847 and 1849. And 1848 is the year when all hell breaks loose everywhere in Europe. There are revolutions in Vienna, revolutions in Paris. Everyone rises up against monarchist royalist power. From Budapest to Naples to Warsaw. And Nicholas I is the Tsar, and he comes to the throne during the Decembrist uprising of 1825. So he does not want to have a revolution in Russia. Thank you very much. And so he decides to arrest all of these young people of the Petrashevsky Circle because they dare to read the wrong books. They read Saint-Simon, they read Owen, they read Belinsky, who is a Russian socialist literary critic. They read utopian socialists, and Belinsky he was a literary genius. He was so helpful to many writers whose works he commented on. And Belinsky is the literary critic to whom Turgenev dedicates his Fathers and Sons, so extremely influential in Russian literature. But what these young kids read is Belinsky, so this is the literary critic, Belinsky's letter to Gogol, where he accuses Gogol of being a conservative, of being a reactionary. And he basically says to Gogol, you were the star. You were our greatest hope. You wrote so beautifully about the catastrophic conditions of people living in the big metropolis, but you betrayed us. You support autocracy. You support the czar. You support serfdom. This letter, of course, was banned by the censors, and it was too irresistible for these young people. They're arrested. They're sent to the Peter and Paul Fortress, which is a military prison at that time, a formidable building, to say the least. And this is my photograph. And this was the governor of the Peter and Paul Fortress's house. And this is one of the corridors. I visited this place a few years ago. This would have been Dostoevsky's cell and the clothes that he would have been wearing. So the young men spend a few months in the Peter and Paul Fortress in 1849, and then they're handed the death sentence by firing squad. So now you understand the connection between Dostoevsky's life and all of those references to executions. As soon as Prince Mushkin enters the Yupanchin's house, he talks to the valet, and he already starts talking about executions by firing squad. When he talks to the Yupanchin sisters, he talks about what goes through the mind of a human being when he knows he's going to be executed, and how does it make you feel when you realize you have only 5 minutes to live. Myshkin talks about an execution that he witnessed in France, and that is exactly what happened to Dostoevsky. He witnessed an execution through guillotining in France, and the Yupanchin sisters ask him, a person who knows that he's going to have only five minutes to live, but then lives, will that inform his life? Will he lead a more fulfilling life? Will he appreciate life more? And Dostoevsky and Mushkin says no. No, you squander life. And so in so many ways, Mushkin's constant references to executions, they are alarming, they're disheartening. There's almost this obsessive quality to it, but also there's a lot of wisdom to it. Human beings squander lives, and squandered lives are a focus of all of Dostoevsky's novels. Why do we, even if we understand just how catastrophically short our existence is, why can't we lead more beautiful lives? And this thought is omnipresent in the soliloquies of Hippolyte, who is a teenager who knows that he's dying from tuberculosis. So at one point he says, yes, I was dying in my room in St. Petersburg, and when I would open the window, I would see a wall. So I came to Pavlovsk, where there are trees and friends, and I'm still going to die, surrounded by trees and friends. So the idea of death as the final arbiter of human existence is present in every single reference that Mushkin makes to executions. And of course, this is the most extensive exploration of by Dostoevsky of his own near-death by firing squad execution experience. The sentence is commuted to service, hard labor service in Siberia. And this is also my photograph. This is the Semyonovsky plots today. There's a statue to Griboyedov there. This is where the mock execution took place. And Dostoevsky will wear shackles on his ankles for 4 years. You wear them to sleep, you wear them to bathe, you wear them 24/7. They're never taken off. And I always tell my students, ask my students to guess why the diamond on the back. And it's extremely disheartening. If you're running away, it's a target. So it's for prisoners to be shot if they are running away. And this is Vladimirka. This is a painting by Isaac Levitan, a good friend of Chekhov. And this is the road that prisoners would take on their way from European Russia to Siberia. This is an amazing painting of prisoners, and Dostoevsky would have looked like these men. The marker where they are placing their graffiti is the marker that separates Europe from Asia. The Ural Mountains are not very tall, and that's the marker where you know that all of a sudden you entered the Asian part of Russia. This is where Dostoevsky serves his 4 years of hard labor service. It's in the Omsk region, so on the other side of the Ural Mountains, on the Asian side, on the border with today's Kazakhstan. And this is what his prison camp would have looked like. Wooden buildings, shackled prisoners. And the only book that he could read during that time was the New Testament. And this New Testament was given to him by one of the women who followed her husband to Siberia in 1826, a Decembrist wife. Dostoevsky will keep this copy of the New Testament for the rest of his life. When Sofia Marmeladova will be reading from the New Testament in Crime and Punishment, the physical description of the book is that of the book that Dostoevsky was given by a Decembrist wife on his way to Siberian exile, and he will keep this book for the rest of his life. So if Tolstoy died with a copy of Brothers Karamazov on his nightstand, Dostoevsky died with the New Testament that was given to him by a Decembrist wife before he entered the Siberian prison camp. And here it is. And remarkably, Dostoevsky learned freedom when he was in Siberia, the freedom of the soul. And he had this epiphany when he was in the prison camp. He hated his prison mates. They were murderers. They were drunkards. They were catastrophically mean to him. He was a college graduate, a published author, a commissioned officer who was all of a sudden living with people he never met, he never understood. So Dostoevsky's profound understanding of human psychology comes from these years of horror. And at one point, he looked at these men who were singing their drunken songs all around him, and he said, "Who am I to judge them? I am one of them. I am here with them. I cannot be above them." And you can sense that resignation and acceptance of humanity in Prince Myshkin's attitude to so many characters in the book, especially his attitude to Marie in Switzerland. So who am I to judge her? I am a human being. She's a human being. We have this human connection. And loving people is the most crucial human aspect. Eventually, in Brothers Karamazov, this will evolve in Father Zosima's statement, hell is when you cannot love. It's not how people treat you, it's how you relate to people. You cannot change people, you cannot change the world, but you can love people, because if you can't love, you are in hell. And so that is very, very important for Dostoevsky. More images of Siberia, and then eventually he ends up in Kazakhstan as a prison guard. So after 4 years of hard labor in Siberia in the Omsk region, he is moved to what is today Semey, but at that point it was called Semipalatinsk. It's in Kazakhstan today, but it was a part of Russian Empire at that time. And once again, he sees freedom. He sees incredible, incredible open spaces, which he would not have seen. I mean, he's a child of the city, right? He was born in Moscow, lives in St. Petersburg, and he discovers freedom in the oddest of places during his imprisonment. This is the house where he lived in Semipalatinsk. It's a museum today. I've never been, need to go sometime. And this is a photograph of Dostoevsky in his prison guard uniform. I love this statue. It was erected in Omsk in the 1990s, and you see Dostoevsky walking off the pedestal and shedding his bindings. He is Lazarus. So the resurrection of Lazarus is the most important aspect of Crime and Punishment, and Dostoevsky shedding these bindings that confined him in his own mind. And the resurrection of Dostoevsky as a human being and as a writer begins post-Siberia. The Siberian experience is described in his novel Notes from the Dead House. There are so many discussions of criminality in The Idiot. You are just beginning to hear sort of the background noise of murders. Some of the characters are talking about this murder that was recently committed, where 6 people are murdered. Eventually, you will hear horrid stories of cannibalism and more murders. And pay attention to the numbers. At one point, you will realize that the numbers add up to 666. And that's very important, because the longest discussion of horrors will occur during Dostoevsky's reassessment of the book of Revelation, otherwise known as the Apocalypse. And The Idiot is Dostoevsky's reinterpretation of the book of Revelation in the context of the 19th century. So when you read about breaking of seals, when you read about the beast, when you notice numbers that refer to a number 6, just please remember we are headed to a long soliloquy, a revelation of one of the characters that is based on the revelation of the New Testament, the last book of the New Testament. So Notes from the Dead House is where Dostoevsky starts exploring human criminality for the first time, and it's a fictionalized account of his time in Siberia. Here it is, and there's an opera based on it by the wonderful Czech composer Janacek. This is a London staging of the opera, and this is the Metropolitan Opera staging of the opera. And I've seen this production at the Met in New York City, and it just leaves you hollowed out on the inside and speechless. At that point, Dostoevsky goes to Europe. And those of you who read War and Peace with me, when Rostopchin, the governor of Moscow, is asked to brace for the French invasion, he says, how am I going to convince people to fight the French? The French are our prophets, and Paris is the heavenly place for Russians. So he goes to the place that is the heavenly place, and Dostoevsky is horribly disappointed in Europe because he feels that European culture is materialistic, shallow, and completely uninspiring. And so he leaves his wife, who is dying of tuberculosis, in St. Petersburg. He marries her in Siberia, catastrophic marriage. She's a widow with a child. He is a convict. Neither of them have good marrying prospects, right? So her death from tuberculosis informs Dostoevsky's writing about Ippolit and him dying of tuberculosis. Dostoevsky lives in St. Petersburg for a spell, but all of these novels are somewhere in the future, right? Brothers Karamazov will be the final novel he will write. So he goes to Paris. This is the Pantheon, and he writes this very snarky little book, the second set of notes, right? So there's Notes from the Dead House. Now he writes Winter Notes on Summer Impressions, where he criticizes Europeans for their shallowness and for their preachiness, for their belief that they've achieved the height of civilizational development and progress excuses everything. You can hear the reverberations of this in The Idiot, where Dostoevsky is sending 3 characters into Russia from the West, and they're riding in the same train compartment, and these characters are really symbolic extensions of ideas. So Myshkin, remember when Nastasia Filipovna sees him for the first time, she says, I've seen you somewhere. Of course, he has seen her before because he has seen her portrait, which is such a huge part of the discussion early on in the novel. But then she looks at him and she says, I've seen you somewhere. And of course, the meekness and forgiving nature of Myshkin is that of Christ. So Dostoevsky creates the most Christ-like character who rides into Russia from the West, where all great ideas are born. And the second character he places into that train compartment is the Antichrist character, Rogozhin. And his last name comes from the Russian word for rog, for horn, rog, and Rogozha is an animal skin. And his first name, Parfyon, comes from the Greek word Parthenos. That's why we have the Parthenon, the temple of the virgin goddess Athena. Parthenos means primal, virginal, original. So Dostoevsky explores to what extent darkness is original to humanity, and then introduces a character who brings light through his loving, forgiving nature. The third character in that train compartment is Lebedev, who introduces himself as the interpreter of the apocalypse. But they have to be coming from the West, where all of these isms are migrating into Russia. And the chapter that I'm commenting on today, we will have all of those isms unleashed on all of the characters in the novel through these socialist kids who show up at Myshkin's Pavlovsk dacha, and they start demanding things for them. So political ideas are about to explode in the novel. Dostoevsky has a love affair during his first trip to Europe, and the young woman's name is Apollinaria Suslova. Apollinaria Suslova. In his novel *The Gambler*, she will become Polina, and in *The Idiot*, she evolves into Nastasia Filipovna. So all of the femme fatales that Dostoevsky creates in his novels, from Polina in *The Gambler* to Nastasia Filipovna in *The Idiot*, and then later on Grushenka in Brothers Karamazov, they are an homage to really the first great love of his life. He's madly in love with her. She's young, she's exciting, and she wants to blow things up. She's a radical revolutionary, and she openly confesses to Dostoevsky that to achieve revolutionary goals, you have to have revolutionary means of getting there. And he is in love with her, but also terrified of this ideology that is spreading all over Europe like wildfire in the 1860s and 70s. He goes to London, he sees the Crystal Palace, and for him, the Crystal Palace will become sort of the final marker of European development as this culture that achieves material perfection in the here and now. And Dostoevsky sees the Crystal Palace. Of course, Queen Victoria was the one who opened it. The World Exhibition was held in the Crystal Palace in London. At the same time as Dostoevsky sees poverty, slums, child prostitution in London, his chapter on London called Ball is devastating to read. And this is all in Winter Notes on Summer Impressions. His brother Mikhail is dying in the meantime. He was a really good brother. When nobody would publish Dostoevsky after Siberia, Mikhail, who is married and has several children, takes on debt to open 2 magazines to publish his brother's works. And those magazines are Epoch and Time, Epocha and Vremya. So Mikhail opens these 2 magazines to publish his brother. And when Mikhail dies, Dostoevsky takes on all of his debts, and he assumes responsibility for his widow and the children. So when his wife dies, Dostoevsky assumes responsibility for his stepson, Pasha, and the issue of money and debt and the need to acquire money by any and all means possible is a huge part of The Idiot, right? It's a novel about money. Mushkin shows up with a tiny bundle. By the end of part 1, he's a millionaire. Rogozhin is riding in some absolutely horrifically hideous clothes into Russia from the West. And we find out that his father just died and he's a millionaire. And so the throwing of 100,000 rubles into the fire by Nastasia Filipovna is a catastrophically thrilling moment in the novel. And of course, Ganka wants to acquire money to become important. Ptitsin is a moneylender who wants to have rental houses in St. Petersburg. So money is a huge aspect of Dostoevsky's life, and the lack of it is enshrined into the plot of The Idiot. The Insulted and the Humiliated is the next novel Dostoevsky publishes, also, of course, about the miserable lives of the undertrodden in St. Petersburg. It's fascinating. This novel contains the first epileptic character Dostoevsky introduces. It's a young woman who has epileptic fits in the novel. Dostoevsky was an epileptic. He creates the most famous epileptic character he creates is Prince Myshkin. And we already experienced one of his epileptic fits. That's when Kolya, a wonderful teenage character in the novel, Kolya brings him to Lebedev. Lebedev places him into a dacha in Pavlovsk for recuperation. And the final terrifying epileptic character that Dostoevsky will create will be, of course, Smerdyakov in Brothers Karamazov. So epilepsy and epileptic characters begin in The Insulted and the Humiliated, or Insulted and the Injured. In Russian, the title is Униженные и оскорбленные, and continues on through The Idiot and Brothers Karamazov. So Winter Notes on Summer Impressions, I can't recommend it enough. It's a super snarky book where Dostoevsky is saying, yeah, All of those people in Europe, they're teaching us Russians how to live. And look at them. All they want is money. There are these tremendous power struggles. He looks at England and he looks at the religious discord in England between the Protestants and the Catholics. And this religious discord between the Protestants and the Catholics helps him to reevaluate his own attitude towards Russian Christianity. And then comes Notes from Underground. So we read Notes from Underground. I commented on it on Substack in the fall of 24. Please look for my commentary if you're interested in it, but it becomes the foundation of the Great Five. And in this, in the slender 100-page novel, Dostoevsky asks the following question. Why are people so miserable? Why do people do things out of spite? Why, in the middle of potentially a happy life, they self-destruct? All of those questions are asked in The Idiot. So there's this famous quote in Notes from Underground, and I paraphrase: give a human being such economic preconditions that he, this human being, will only eat, this human being will only sleep, eat gingerbread, and worry about the non-cessation of world history. And it is precisely here that this human being, out of sheer ingratitude, out of sheer lampoonery, will do something nasty. How often do we have references to Nastasia Filipovna doing things out of spite? When she shows up at Totsky's place in St. Petersburg, and she becomes this completely new and unexpected event in his life. It's a very different woman from the young woman that he groomed as a teenager and assaulted repeatedly in the village of Delight. This Nastasia Filipovna shows up and she says, you know, now I want to triumph over you out of spite, out of the horror years of you using me for your own pleasure. And this reference to Nastasia Filipovna wanting to triumph over all men who surround her out of complete spite, that is definitely a thought that Dostoevsky develops in Notes from Underground. So the abolition of serfdom is referenced in Notes from Underground and in Crime and Punishment. And then comes Turgenev's novel, Fathers and Sons. So Notes from Underground is Dostoevsky's response, not just to Turgenev's Fathers and Sons. And I commented on this novel in the spring of 2024, but also to Chernyshevsky's novel, What is to be Done? So if Turgenev is talking about this intergenerational strife in Russia and ideological debates between the older generation, the generation of 1840s liberals, and the generation of 1860s radicals, Chernyshevsky goes one step further, and he dedicates an entire novel to 1860s radicals, who are all of these young people who admired Dostoevsky because he was an 1840s liberal who went to Siberia for his convictions. But Dostoevsky is terrified where Russian radicalism is taking the youth. So pretty soon we're going to meet these revolutionary youth at the dacha of Myshkin in the next chapter in part 2 of The Idiot. All of these ideas are Dostoevsky's response to Turgenev, Chernyshevsky, through Notes from Underground, through Crime and Punishment, and into The Idiot. So everything is connected. And then Dostoevsky refers to the Crystal Palace, which he feels is the new Tower of Babel, that people are so enamored of progress for progress's sake. They're so enamored of the comforts of modern life that they feel that they can ascend to heaven, not to be closer to God, but to grab God and yank him down, her down to our level. And so that is Dostoevsky's assessment of this new ideological Tower of Babel created. It's amazing to what extent all of these ideas are going to evolve in the course of The Idiot. And there are so many references to progress in The Idiot. Please pay attention to them as you read. One of them will be to trains. And Lebedev at some point will be asked to comment on the star wormwood and interpret the reference to the star wormwood in the Revelation, in the book of Revelation. And Lebedev will say, it's the trains. Trains are the new star wormwood. And just recall, the characters arrive to Russia from the West, from the place where all the isms migrate into Russia by train. And then Lebedev will refer to trains as the star wormwood, which is this bitter thing that we assume is a harbinger of progress, faster transportation, faster acquisition of goods, makes our lives better. And I always tell my students, so what would be the star of wormwood in our today's world? What is this material thing that is supposed to make all of our lives better? And then I say, it's DoorDash and Amazon Prime. So physical attainment that makes us happy for a split second, but how does our soul figure into this material comfort? That is the question that Dostoevsky asks in The Idiot. We live better, we are supposed to be happier, but we are not. Why? Because this material progress does not correlate with the attainment of balance in our souls. And all of Dostoevsky characters are imperfect soul seekers. So his wife dies, tuberculosis. Dostoevsky actually proposes to the femme fatale Apollinaria Suslova, but he is rebuffed. She does not accept his marriage proposal, and Crime and Punishment is written by a man who is seeking an understanding of himself. And it's not a novel about the beautiful sights of St. Petersburg, all of these like Kazan Cathedral, Nevsky Prospect, Isaac Cathedral, the Bronze Horseman. It is a novel set in the bowels of St. Petersburg. This is the Haymarket Square, Senaya Ploshchad, where the not so wealthy inhabitants of St. Petersburg live. And this is what Raskolnikov will overhear the conversation that will set his blood on fire and will tell his mind that it's time to commit a murder for an idea. And I visited the square. It's amazing. You walk through St. Petersburg and you walk through all of the locations of Crime and Punishment. This is the house where Dostoevsky lived when he was writing Crime and Punishment. There's a note on the building, a plaque on the building, noting that this is where he lived when he was writing. And this is Raskolnikov's house. And I always quote this because it's such a wonderful literary plaque. And I'll translate it. The tragic fates of the people of this neighborhood of St. Petersburg serve for Dostoevsky as the foundation for the passionate sermon on goodness for all humanity. That's a really good literary plaque. So you just keep walking around. And Crime and Punishment is a novel about a murder, but I hate all of these covers that just show axes and blood, because it's even in St. Petersburg, like you walk through this neighborhood and there's a grocery store called Raskolnikov, and the main symbol of the grocery store is an axe. I can't recommend this film enough. So it's Crime and Punishment, 1970, made in the Soviet Union. It's an amazing film. And I'm just going to give you the heads up. If you're in Iowa City, Film Scene is going to show the Japanese adaptation of The Idiot on December 9th. It's a Tuesday. I will do the talk back after that. And it's the Kurosawa film, The Idiot. So, but can't recommend this 1970 Crime and Punishment enough. And this is where the novel begins. And it's fascinating. And I need you to understand the difference between Crime and Punishment and The Idiot. Crime and Punishment is a very St. Petersburg-centered novel where you literally can go from location to location because Dostoevsky is writing in St. Petersburg. The Idiot is a symbolic St. Petersburg novel written by a man who misses Russia, misses the Russian language, which is the source of his inspiration, but writes about St. Petersburg from abroad through the prism of rejection, alienation, through the prism of longing to be in Russia. He writes the St. Petersburg chapters of The Idiot from Geneva, from Vevey in Switzerland, and he finally finishes the novel in Florence. So during our December Zoom, I'm going to show some of these locations to all of you. So the bridge where Crime and Punishment, so all of these Crime and Punishment locations are completely real, unlike the sort of more symbolic St. Petersburg locations in The Idiot. And this could be an illustration for Crime and Punishment, or it could be an illustration for The Idiot. I mean, it literally could be Prince Myshkin, the dejected person trying to understand the difference between love and compassion and pity. And that is the crucial question in the novel. Dostoevsky writes, sometimes when you take writing classes, you are told, write what you know. Dostoevsky had to write a novel in 1 month because of a terrible, terrible contract he signed with a publisher. And this terrible contract stipulated that he has to give a novel in 1866 by November 1. On October 1, there's no novel yet. So he decides to write about gambling so that Apollinaria Suslova, his lover, becomes Polina in this novel. She eventually evolves into Nastasia Filipovna. And in order to finish this novel, he hires a stenographer. Her name is Anna Grigorievna Snitkina. She will be his second wife, helpmate, lover, mother of his children, muse, and also, most importantly, eventually his publisher. So amazing woman. So there's a wonderful film about this too. Can't recommend enough. It's called 26 Days in the Life of Dostoevsky. And between October 4, 1866 and November 1, they finished this novel. He dictates it to her. The Idiot will be written the same way. Starting with The Idiot, every novel that Dostoevsky will write, he will dictate to his wife, Anna. And so The Idiot, Demons, Adolescent, and Brothers Karamazov, all the four great novels after Crime and Punishment were dictated to her. She would take everything down in stenographic writing, then convert it into Russian, give it to him for editing, and then based on the edited notes from that day's dictation, he will create the scenes for next day's dictation. Can you imagine being Anna on the receiving end of all of the mass scenes in The Idiot, where everyone gathers in the same room and behaves spectacularly badly in a very dramatic, over-the-top way? Dostoevsky acted out every character in front of her, and she would write down these different speech patterns for every character. And then Dostoevsky would put it together into these catastrophic scenes. And there are so many more catastrophic scenes in The Idiot still coming up. So yes, The Idiot was dictated to her exactly the way the first novel that he dictates to her was written, and that's The Gambler. And that's a scene from the film. Prokofiev will turn this into an opera. Guess what is the most important topic in The Gambler? Money and the need for money. So from The Gambler, this need for money migrates into The Idiot. So Notes from Underground, Crime and Punishment, Katkov publishes in the Russian Messenger, Crime and Punishment. So The Idiot is published in the Russian Messenger in installments throughout 1868, and then the novel comes out in one volume form in 1869. So there we go. So Dostoevsky marries Anna, and they travel to Europe, and the first stop is Dresden, and after that Basel. And this is the painting that has everything to do with The Idiot. Dostoevsky travels to Basel specifically to see one painting, and this painting is Christ in the Tomb by Hans Holbein. And this painting of Christ in the tomb has a destabilizing effect on Dostoevsky. Anna Grigorievna will write in her memoir that she wandered off away from him when they entered the gallery. And eventually she had to go and find him. And he actually pulled a chair up to the painting, and he climbed on the chair to look at the painting more closely. And he said to her, and she recorded it in her memoir, he said to her, "You can lose faith looking at this painting." And that's precisely what Myshkin says to Rogozhin in that all-important chapter, where we find out that in Rogozhin's gloomy house, there is a reproduction of Holbein's Christ. And Myshkin has his soliloquy about the meaning of Christianity after Rogozhin asks him, after Myshkin comments on this painting, "Do you believe in God?" And Myshkin has no answer. And instead of saying, "Yes, I do believe in God," it's such a simple answer, or "No, I don't believe in God," at which point Rogozhin would be thrilled because Rogozhin loves to embrace darkness. Myshkin gives four answers about a man he met on the train who was an atheist, but somehow sounded like he was just reading from a book. Reverberations of Notes from Underground, once again, right? The prostitute Lisa saying to the underground man, "You sound like a book." And so there's this bookish rationalization why there is no faith in this character that Myshkin mentions. And the second one is about two merchants, one of them coveting the merchant's watch, but then crossing himself and then murdering him, which makes Rogozhin so happy because blaspheming against God thrills him. Then the third tale that Myshkin tells after looking at this painting, and that one is of soldier who sells him a cross, and Mushkin obviously understands that it's a tin cross, but the soldier says, no, 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 look, it's silver. And Mushkin pays for the value, the price of a silver item, and takes the tin cross from the soldier, but doesn't judge him. And then the fourth story that Mushkin tells is of a woman, a peasant woman, who rejoices at the first laughter of her baby because, he says, through that laughter, Christ reveals himself to us. So 4 tales, instead of answering after looking at this painting, after saying, you can lose your faith looking at this painting, not answering Rogojin's question, do you believe in God? He tells these 4 tales, and then he says, who am I to judge these people? Who knows? Maybe that very woman is the wife of the drunk soldier who sold me the cross. Do you see how that is the statement that Dostoevsky makes in Siberia after he sees all of these drunk murderers all around him and eventually says, I'm here with them. I am a human being. They are human beings. I can't judge them. So that is Mushkin's response to the existence of God in this world. We should just love each other because we have no other options in this world, and judging each other is tough because all of us are sinners. At which point Rogojin says, do you still have that cross that the soldier gave you? And Myshkin, in his beautiful innocence, says, oh, you want to be brothers in Christ with me? Of course, Parfyon. They exchange crosses, but there's a reason why Rogojin wants that cross. He wants the cross of Judas, the person who sold innocence for profit. And for Dostoevsky, there is no greater crime in this world than making profit off of human innocence. How many times do we have references in The Idiot about the childish nature of human beings? So, and Myshkin is the one who, even in Ptitsin, who is a moneylender and kind of a shadowy character, he says, oh, that thing that you just said, that was so sweet. There's still a child in you. To Madame Yupanchina, he says, oh, you are just a child. You are just always in such a childish attitude towards the world. I mean, for Madame Yupanchina, she's just a strange character, a babbling character, a goofball of a character, but her reaction to everything is so authentic and innocent. And Myshkin loves that about her. And Myshkin, of course, so Dostoevsky sees this painting. They go to Switzerland, to Geneva, and he starts immediately writing The Idiot. And to his niece, he writes in a letter that I wanted to create a novel about a perfectly beautiful human being who exists in the here and now. Thus, the Christ-like association in Myshkin, thus his moments of light, profound light that he experiences at the beginning of each epileptic fit, and thus the connection between Myshkin and Don Quixote, who is the perfectly beautiful human being who, despite all odds, wants to make the world a better place, of course, with catastrophic results. So The Idiot becomes that novel based on all of these experiences of Dostoevsky. And let me see what my next image is. Yes, set in St. Petersburg, but kind of symbolic St. Petersburg, allegoric St. Petersburg that is far away. And in one of my notes on Substack, I write that Dostoevsky's Idiot is a novel of exile to the same extent as Dante's Divine Comedy is a book of exile. Dante is exiled from his beloved Florence and writes the Divine Comedy in exile in Ravenna. Dostoevsky is fully cognizant of the significance of him finishing his novel of exile, The Idiot, in Florence. So in our December Zoom, we'll talk about the literary background that is inherent in The Idiot, and I touched on it just briefly today, but also we'll talk about the locations of The Idiot. St. Petersburg, the St. Petersburg suburb of Pavlovsk, and also about Geneva, Vevey, and to what extent finishing the novel in Florence is so important for Dostoevsky. So I'm just going to end the Zoom right here, and the sharing of the PowerPoint right here, and perhaps take questions if possible. I set aside an hour and a half for this for the Zoom because there's so much to discuss in Dostoevsky. And those of you who already heard my talk about Dostoevsky's biography, doing it through the prism of the idiot is so important because this is the most autobiographical novel that Dostoevsky has ever written. So all of those discussions of executions, of execution by firing squad, of what it means for a human being to know that he has only a few minutes to live. Would it inform his life better if he's saved? And then Dostoevsky's attitude towards capital punishment. I mean, Mushkin at one point says something that is still controversial today. He says that capital punishment is worse than murder because the person who is granted a death sentence will have to live with knowing that he's going to be deprived of his life for years. And you talk about, you read about prisoners who are on death row for 20, 30 years. It's catastrophic. So Dostoevsky asks so much of us. He creates novels with these characters who are um, not good role models, who murder people for ideological convictions, who he fills his novels with profligate squanders, murders, lechers. Totsky is a despicable character. He's a disgusting character in The Idiot. And Wastrels, Ganka, he's such a fascinating character. Ganka Ivalgin, he's wasting his life away. Why? And all of these enigmatic women. Nastasia Filipovna, and her name, of course, comes from Anastasia, which means resurrection. Her last name, Barashova, comes from the Russian word for lamb, Barashek. She stands in for the resurrection of the lamb. And that is, once again, a reference to the book of Revelation. Rogozhin is so beastly. He is a symbolic representation of the beast of the apocalypse. And he loves darkness. He loves darkness. He loves blaspheming. He wants the cross of Judas, the cross of the man who sold Christ for profit. And just watch his darkness evolve throughout the entire novel. And then there's Mushkin, who is a combination of Christ-like meekness and forgiveness, a combination of quixotic questing for a better world. And you have to understand that whenever Don Quixote intervenes on the behalf of beaten servants or abused women, after he leaves, the fate of the servant and the abused woman becomes so much worse. And yet it's this aspiration to make the world a better place that is so infectious in Don Quixote of Cervantes. And of course, we have Aglaya in the next chapter reading a Pushkin poem about a questing knight that is an homage to Quixote. So we'll talk about all of these literary allusions in our December talk. There are so many literary references. There's a reference to the Three Musketeers, and we just finished reading the first sequel to the Three Musketeers this summer. There's a reference to The Lady of the Camellias, written by the son of Alexandre Dumas, also named Alexandre Dumas, the son of the man who wrote the Three Musketeers, and the association between the main character of The Lady of the Camellias and Nastasia Filipovna. There's a whole story about camellias. And later on in the novel, Mushkin will notice that she is reading Flaubert's Madame Bovary. So you're welcome, world. Because with this group on Substack, we read The Lady of the Camellias, we read The Three Musketeers, and we read Madame Bovary a few years ago. So Dostoevsky is a very literary writer. And then the reference to Quixote and the reference to Pushkin in the chapter, and Pushkin's poem about a questing knight in the chapter that I'm commenting on today. So many more things to discuss. And just wanted to see if there are any questions in the remaining few minutes. And as you are thinking about this, we'll do another Zoom in December. It'll cover part 3 and part 4 of the novel. Brace yourselves. There's so much catastrophe to come. Not an easy novel to read. This is probably Dostoevsky at his darkest. And the resolution does not happen in The Idiot. The resolution doesn't happen in Demons. The resolution doesn't happen in The Adolescent.
Mm.
The resolution happens on the last page of Brothers Karamazov. But reading that last page in the aftermath of assessing the entirety of Dostoevsky will be so rewarding.
Anna, this
Yes.
is Maureen. Hi.
Hi,
Th-
hi. So good to see
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. And thank you for this too.
Oh,
I don't know if you
yes,
can see that.
it's my cute little book here.
Yes, it's your great book.
Yes, let me find it so that I can show it.
Yeah.
My publisher will be thrilled. So this is the book that I published.
Yes.
It just came out this month. It's 13 Notes from Napoleon, Iowa. I just gave a radio interview 30 minutes before getting on the Zoom about this book, and there's a chapter on Dostoevsky in it. So Dostoevsky and his imprisonment, his death sentence, and to what extent that experience informs his Crime and Punishment, his Notes from Underground and Crime and Punishment. That is one of the chapters of in the book. So it was heart-wrenching and extremely rewarding to write that chapter. And of course, that chapter is on a book on Napoleon, because Napoleon is such a huge part of the evolution of Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. And when you're going to be reading about, I'll just say the name of the character, General Ivalgin will have a
Mm.
long contemplation on Napoleon later on in the novel. And you are laughing through the whole thing because it's so absurd, and you're weeping at the same time. So Dostoevsky will not let go of Napoleon anytime soon. So this poster is just fine for the idiot as well, not just Crime and Punishment.
Well, I was lucky enough to order early, and so you autographed my book as well.
Yes, yes, it was
So
so much fun.
that was great. So I wanted to just make a couple of comments. I did watch that movie, The 26 Days in the
Mhm.
Life of, and I loved it.
Excellent.
It was simple and slow moving, but so beautifully done. I really enjoyed that. The other thing that really took my attention in his writing, the description of his epileptic fits
Mhm.
were just brilliant. And I don't think I've ever read anything medically um, so in tune to possibly what happens before, seconds before an epileptic has a fit like that. That
Mhm.
fascinated me. And the other
It's just a
piece,
brilliant light,
brilliant.
absolutely
Yeah,
brilliant light, and then darkness. And it's amazing, like Dostoevsky will experience these epileptic fits throughout his life, and
yeah.
Anna will be instrumental in helping him through the process of recovery, because at that point you fall and you lose
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. And it's such a vulnerable moment. So Myshkin's vulnerability comes from both his ability to see the light, but also his descent into darkness,
Yeah.
and thus his ability to relate to characters who suffer, such as Marie in Switzerland. And I will keep commenting on that because Marie in Switzerland will resurface in his relationship later on with Nastasia Filipovna, who is a very similar character, a woman who was wronged by men and shunned by society.
That, I don't know, it was 8 or 10 pages or 5 or 6 pages, the description of Marie and her life. That was heart-wrenching. That was hard to get through.
And note that the children that he finally
Yes.
talks to, because for Dostoevsky, children and teenagers are priceless because they're like stem cells. They can evolve and
Mm,
turn towards darkness if the example that they see in life is darkness, or towards light if they surface towards this need for light in their lives. And it's amazing to what extent those children then show up in Brothers Karamazov, and all the
ah,
children that Alyosha Karamazov speaks to about the significance of being kind to Ilyushechka, who is pelted by stones at first. So the pelting of Marie with stones becomes the pelting of Ilyushechka with stones in Brothers Karamazov. It's like reading all of Dostoevsky is so important, because then you're reading Brothers Karamazov and you feel that this genius finally pulled every single source of inspiration. Every character has been so beautifully developed
mm.
throughout the 5 novels that when we get to Brothers Karamazov, we have the distillation of everything that Dostoevsky aspired towards all his life.
Well, I want to thank you too, because I was thinking, I can't imagine reading this just alone
No.
with like no conversation or dialogue or education or depth that you bring to it. I just can't imagine that it would, have any kind of resonance or
Mhm.
I don't know, any place in my body.
And it's
Uh,
a very dark novel. I know readers who cannot handle it. I mean,
yeah,
I've noticed that some readers just cannot continue with this novel. Just word of
yes, I
mouth,
saw that.
it gets a lot darker. It
Oh,
gets so much darker, and the darkness is unresolved. So that question, you can lose faith looking at this. The end of the novel, Dostoevsky, I mean, that painting informs the novel for a reason. Dostoevsky will say at the end of the novel, do you still have any faith in humanity, readers? And that's a very, very hard question to answer. And in
sure.
Demons, it's a hell of a roller coaster ride. Funniest novel he has ever written, but even darker than The Idiot. So, kids, join the fun. We are going to continue, and really crucial to understanding what it means to be a human being in a world that is falling apart. I mean,
Yes.
he literally writes a novel, The Idiot, that is his assessment of the apocalyptic times that surround him. And that's precisely why I wanted to read The Idiot and Demons, because everyone is just running around and screaming about the impossibility of it all. And I wanted to contextualize the impossibility of it all because people faced impossibilities forever and ever. For my next book, I wrote the first paragraph of my next book. I'm so happy. Like, one paragraph, it's perfect. Now I don't even have to write the book. But the book is about revolution. So the American Republic will be 250 next year. And my first chapter is going to be about the English Civil War and Oliver Cromwell, and to what extent the period of the beheading of Charles I is reverberating in three books that we read, right? It's Paradise Lost. We read it in 2020. Three Musketeers, the first sequel, and the second sequel contains the restoration of Charles II. And I'm reading this phenomenal history of the English Civil War called The Blazing World. I have a hard time dealing with it. What the English did to each other in the
Mm.
early 17th century, during the 30 Years' War in Europe, was horrific, absolutely horrific. And they fought a war against their fellow citizens, neighbors, family member against family member. The atrocities that were committed in England during this time were catastrophic, genocidal, murder, mutilation, torture. Nothing was alien to the sophisticated English. And I'm devastated by this book. My son called me. I was driving through all of my Iowa counties again and listening to the book, and my son called me from California and said, "So glad you called. I needed someone to cheer me up. This is dark." And so this sense of humanity constantly courting its own darkness and yet surfacing to the light. That's what I want to accomplish here. There's always darkness, and the darkness is, Parfil and Ragozhin is epitomizing internal darkness. Darkness is to begin with. Before light, there's darkness. Darkness is what is original, primal. Darkness is primal. That's what Dostoevsky is saying through the character of Ragozhin. But then also he introduces us to all of these amazing characters like Kolya Ivalgin. Do you realize that he loves this character so much, he treasures the creation of this character so much, that in Brothers Karamazov, he will even give the most important character of the novel, Kolenka Krasotkin, the same first name. So Kolya will migrate from The Idiot to Brothers Karamazov without a name change. The same kind of precocious teenager who courts darkness, because when you're a teenager, that's easy way to acquire gravitas status if you do crazy stuff. Like Kolya Krasotkin in Brothers Karamazov will place himself between railroad tracks and wait for the ongoing train. It's madness. But they also yearn for the light. And so I'm going to end this discussion with just saying, watch out for the moment where Kolya Ivalgin will carry a hedgehog in a basket in The Idiot. All of you are going to sob from happiness. It is like the most beautifully cheerful moment. And I'll just end this discussion by telling you, I had two students once, maybe 10 years ago. One of them was a philosophy PhD candidate, and he was marrying a young woman who came to me at the end of first class, and she said, "Anna, I'm taking your class with you because I'm getting married to a man who loves Dostoevsky, and he told me to take a class. And so we are reading The Idiot in that class. And she absolutely loved it. They invited me to their wedding. They were so delightfully sweet. And they got married in Prairie Lights in the bookstore here in Iowa City. They just moved the bookshelves aside. They both worked at Prairie Lights. So the wedding ceremony took place surrounded by books. And their wedding party was in the Prairie Lights Cafe. And I was racking my brain thinking, I need to give them a hedgehog as their wedding present. And so I called all of the pet shops in Iowa City looking for a hedgehog. And they are wild species in Iowa, so you can't purchase a hedgehog. And so I racked my brain and I just thought there's only one present this sweet young couple needs, and that's a hedgehog because of The Idiot, because of Kolya Ivalgin, who is just such a delight. And then I finally thought, well, no hedgehog is available. The next best thing is da 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 da, an onion. So I show up, and those of you who read Brothers Karamazov with me, you understand the onion. So I bought a pot, filled it with soil, put an onion on top, and I bring it to them in the Prairie Lights Cafe, at which point all three of us start sobbing. And so there are all of these people surrounding us. I'm tearing up thinking about it. And so everyone is looking at us and thinking like, this is so weird. Bride and groom weeping over an onion given to them by this strange woman who gives onions at weddings. So they were just the best. So Kolya Ivalgin, just like Kolya Krasotkin, is the most important character in the entire novel. And you don't sense it yet. You know, Dostoevsky will evolve that character when he's writing Brothers Karamazov, but three cheers for teenagers who yearn for the light. That's the salvation of humanity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna.
This was delightful, and looking forward to December. So in December, we'll talk about locations, we'll talk more about literary inspirations, and just word of warning, it is the darkest novel possibly you will ever read. So, but there is light, there's Kolya, there are hedgehogs. So those of you, those people who know me well, when I'm sad, they just say one word to me, hedgehog. And I feel much better right away because of the scene in The Idiot. So have a wonderful rest of October. Another comment tonight. I didn't comment last night because I was getting ready for this interview. So comment tonight, and we'll just keep doing 4 chapters a week till early December. Then sometime in mid-December, we'll have a wonderful concluding Zoom. And heads up, The Idiot adaptation, the Japanese adaptation by Kurosawa, on December 9, Tuesday at Prairie Lights, not Prairie Lights, at Film Scene in Iowa City. So that's it. Bye. Thank you.